Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss the 2026 version of Supergirl, starring Millie Alcock, Matthias Schoenaerts, forgive me if I said that wrong, Eve Ridley, David Cornsweet, and Jason Momoa, directed by Craig Gillespie. Welcome back, sir. And not only welcome back to the resume of Craig Gillespie, but welcome back to DCU after Superman from last year. As I reviewed the director's filmography leading up to Dumb Money, and I and this is the second DCU movie after Superman last year. Now, how did I? Is this going to be better than Superman? Let's get into the movie and find out. We open with Kara Zor-El, aka Supergirl, returned by Millie Alcock from last year's Superman, celebrating her 23rd birthday week with her dog Krypto by getting drunk, playing with Krypto, and ignoring calls from her cousin Superman, or Clark Kent, returned by David Cornsweet. While we move on to Ruthie's family getting murdered by Krem, played by Matthias Schoenaerts, forgive me if I said that wrong, and Ruthie herself, played by Eve Ridley, wants revenge against Krem as the family blows up his spaceship. Because remember, this takes place in the galaxy as Ruthie goes on the hunt for Krem as she goes to a bar where Kara and Krypto are at as she asks for warriors, but one corners her while another steals Ruthie's sword. As Kara fights one of them and to give her the sword back, and Millie Alcock is probably the best thing about the movie, as it was mediocre at best. But other than that, I don't really like any of the characters, as they're just pretentious. Even what's his name, Lobo. When I'll get to him. After giving his sword back to Ruthie, and Krypto saving Kara's life, Ruthie follows Kara home and she sleeps until the next morning, and she gets a call from Superman as he's worried about her until Ruthie knocks on the door 3 times. And she asks Kara for help while she has to use the restroom with the door open. And is that really necessary? At least it's off screen, but the audience can hear it. Meanwhile, Krem steals Kara's ship, and Krypto notices and gets shot with poison by Krem and has 72 hours. And if I'm not mistaken, it's 3 days left to live. And I'm like, poor doggy. That doggy was innocent. As Kara wants to get the antidote for Krypto, as she goes to a planet to find Krem, while we briefly flash back to how Kara met Krypto, and there were times I couldn't understand what the hell was going on, as this plot is a mess, which makes no sense at all. Kara gets on the space bus with an alien named Lloyd and his translator that I swear to God sounded like Seth Rogen. As Ruthie gets on the same space bus, and suddenly pirates arrive and steals every valuable until Kara steals a thing from them to trade for her watch and sword. And she fights them off and gets trapped as she puts on a spacesuit. And this movie makes Supergirl look vulnerable, which is not a good thing for a woman of steel, as she gets beat up and bleeds without kryptonite until later in the movie, which is a bad move on director Craig Gillespie's part. And I get the impression he didn't do his homework on what Supergirl is all about, which really annoys me as she goes to space and gets near a yellow planet. Unless there's. Okay, let me explain something to you about yellow planet versus whatever planet. The red planet doesn't give her powers, and the yellow powers is where her powers come from there, which doesn't make any sense to me. Or if it's green, her powers are weak. Like Superman, for example. That's the only obvious thing I can say about the movie. Kara accepts Ruthie to her mission and asks the pirates where Krem is at and gets a location, and Kara and Ruthie shop for something to give Ruthie so she doesn't die, and they go to a city to find Krem at a bar where some aliens asks to buy Ruthie, and she settles it with an arm wrestle. And suddenly, a giant alien comes in to an arm wrestle her, and she breaks his arm. And Kara fights every single alien and somewhat off screen until we see her kicking ass. And others end up leaving except for Lobo, played by Jason Momoa, in a new DC role. Why is he here? I don't know. I mean, he wants to have fun and he loves this character. As Ruthie tries to hire Lobo to kill Krem as he's looking for Krem, while a couple helps out Kara and Ruthie and puts them in a shelter until nighttime comes, and the action sequences were just dumb. And the cinematography looks absolutely dreadful. Ruthie asks Kara about Superman in his world as she explains she's from Krypton, and we get flashbacks to Krypton blowing up, which didn't get in Superman, which we didn't get in Superman 2025, where we get her father Zor-El and her mother hiding from the destruction 8 years before Kara was born, and she was a young Kara playing with her, and we see a young Kara, excuse me, playing with her parents until her mother was sick. And please notice she doesn't speak English but Kryptonian, while I didn't realize was a language of its own. And her mother dies in front of her daughter and have a funeral service, which is when she meets Krypto, which we flash back to earlier in the film. And Zor-El makes her go to Earth with her cousin Superman, as her world will get destroyed, and the flashback was just horrible. It may be good looking, but it's just horrible. Kara checks in on the couple from the bar that can lead them to Krem, and Kara drinks something poisonous in a tea because the wife trades Kara and Ruthie for their daughter, as Krem and his men kidnap girls and keep them as their brides, which for reasons I don't quite fully get, other than is this Mad Max Fury Road? That's what this was reminding me of. While Kara feels weak as she vomits all over the place, and Ruthie almost gets kidnapped, and I swear to God, Krem looks like a cannibal. But the character is not a freaking cannibal. But he looks like it as they come out and releases the daughters, and Kara comes in and beats up on Krem and his men and save the brides, while Lobo comes in the fight and beats up on the bad guys and like Kara, and Ruthie sees Krem and goes after him despite Kara told her to stay put. And Ruthie almost kills Krem, but Kara doesn't want her to feel bad for the rest of her life, while the daughter is killed by Krem, and argue about it, as this character is a terrible superhero from the get-go. I mean, what's her name? Helen Slater was probably a bad movie, but I related to her more than I relate with this Supergirl. Even though Millie Alcock holds the movie together, I will admit that out of the way, but her character just comes off very unlikable. Kara flies up to space and screams despite the audience can't hear it, and Kara asks the alien trying to buy Ruthie earlier in the film, or as in the movie they're going to call him Squidward, which took me back to SpongeBob in Avengers Infinity War, when Tony Stark calls Ebony Maw Squidward to take him to Krem, and when they get there is when the kryptonite kicks in, because it's nighttime, I'm guessing, at the planet, and Ruthie follows them from behind, and we flash back to when Kara and Krypto meet Superman for the first time, and he says her powers are going to kick in right away. And we move on to a few months later, I'll say, where Kara is unhappy on Earth, and she wakes up in a cave and is saved by Ruthie in a spacesuit. Now, I'm missing all the other Supergirls on screen before this. Don't get me wrong. This is a mediocre Supergirl, but very unlikable, but in a very bad movie. Ruthie gets caught by the bad guys as she's put in a jail cell next to Lobo and Krem, coming in to make a deal with Ruthie for Kara's life, and he'll let her live, but she spits in his face and has second thoughts a few minutes later to tell Krem so she can find a way out of the cell, and lets Lobo out of his cell, so as well as he can let Ruthie have her revenge. And she climbs through vents and gets to the bad guys, one taking a leak, and I'm like I said earlier, is that really necessary? As the whole movie is unnecessary and a letdown after Superman 2025. Kara almost dies, but the sun comes up and puts on the uniform given by Superman earlier in life, while Ruthie reaches to Krem and he captures her until Kara comes in and fights off Krem and the bad guys, and she's shot with more kryptonite. While Ruthie fights with her sword made by her father, and Lobo comes in and joins in the fight and drops Krem and gets his motorcycle back, and Kara gets all the pointy kryptonite out of her, and she drops a ship as of theirs and uses her powers while underwater and rises up and saves Ruthie's life and tells her the brides are still on the ship. Again, I'm going back to Mad Max Fury Road, and that's a better film than this, in my opinion, just to preview my thoughts. And rescues them. And I'm reminded of Black Widow also when the women are captured and controlled by a Harvey Weinstein lookalike. And that's a bad, bad thing. Ruthie wants her revenge against Krem as she almost gets it until Kara beats him up, as well as the other bad guys from left to right, which felt like a headache to Ruthie, as Ruthie, grabs her sword and almost kills Krem until Kara talks her out of it. And Kara takes the antidote for Crypto, while Lobo rides away from the area after Kara stabs Krem twice, once for Crypto and the other for Ruthie's family's murder. And she comes back to save her Dougie's life. And she gives her licks and kisses, and Ruthie briefly plays with Crypto, and Kara asks Ruthie to celebrate her birthday with her. And we go back to Earth as Superman's apartment with Crypto to stay on Earth, and Crypto eating up all the food, including the chocolate. And Superman tells Crypto to not eat the chocolate, as well as Ruthie stays with her aunt. And the climax was bad enough as it is, but how bad? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 3.8 out of 10. I don't really like the characters, as Millie Alcock is the best thing about the movie, as she was mediocre at best, but her character comes off unlikable, like the other characters were just pretentious, and there were times I couldn't follow what the hell was going on in this plot, as this movie is a mess, which makes no sense at all, and this is a letdown after last year's Superman, and the cinematography in this looks absolutely dreadful. The action sequences were just dumb from the get-go, as this movie makes Supergirl look vulnerable as she gets beat up and bleeds until she gets to a yellow planet, while making no sense whatsoever without any kryptonite whatsoever until later in the movie. And I get the impression director Craig Gillespie didn't do his homework on the character of Supergirl whatsoever, because she survives with powers on yellow planets, whereas not on red or green, which was obvious, and others, which doesn't make sense to me. And the flashback scene was just horrible. And it looks good, but it's just horrible. And the character was a terrible superhero from the get-go. I did miss Helen Slater, Laura Vandervoort, Sasha Calle, and Melissa Benoist as Supergirl, even though I've only seen a couple of them on the show. And don't get me wrong, this is a mediocre Supergirl in a bad movie. Well, no, it's not a good Supergirl in a bad movie. So, unfortunately, this is a non-recommendation for this movie, because this has some unlikable characters with a messy plot, and the climax was just bad, and as bad as any of the other unlikable movies from the DCEU, as this feels the most disappointing out of any of the movies that came out this summer so far, including in the DCU, which is a shame. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and until we get to October with Clayface, up and away.